everybody, how you doing? Welcome back to another deep dive into one of my recent guitar builds. So the story of this guitar is that it was built as part of the Reclaimed Wood Challenge for the Holy Grail Guitar Show in 2020. So unfortunately the show was cancelled, like so many things that year. However, I carried on with the guitar build and this is what I came up with. So it's made entirely from reclaimed materials, with the exception of obviously the strings, the tuners and the tailpiece. But every other component was pulled out from a mahogany dining table, an oak beam from a house, a kitchen worktop, and even the inlay in the rosette was a piece of old jewellery and some cedar floorboards. This guitar is the fourth in a kind of series of Kandinsky-inspired pieces. So Vasily Kandinsky was a Russian painter operating at the end of his career during the golden age of jazz, so the 20s, 30s and 40s, that a lot of the gypsy jazz music is associated with. I first saw his paintings at the Guggenheim in New York about 20 years ago, and I was struck by the geometric interest and the colour of his paintings. They're very abstract, really interesting, quite satisfying to look at. I later learned with Kandinsky that a lot of his paintings are abstract representations of sound and music, which felt very appropriate for a jazz guitar. I decided to keep all of the inlays just to the fingerboard and the tailpiece areas. The edges of the fingerboard are bound as well, so that your eye isn't kind of thrown by the mismatched contrasting colours of oak and corian. Visually, I think the whole instrument works beautifully. There's a sense that everything's been inverted, so it's quite rare to have a top of a guitar that's so dark, and then the bindings are much lighter in colour. A light fingerboard, a light headstock veneer, and a light coloured bridge. The woods. So, what we're looking at here, like I said, this is all reclaimed wood, so I was really limited by what I had available, what I could get my hands on, what I wanted to use. The majority of the back and the sides and the front and the neck is all reclaimed mahogany. Most of it came from a dining table that was gifted to me by my old German teacher from secondary school. So thank you, Mr. Roberts. This is what came out of your dining table. Making a guitar from a dining table is a bit of a challenge. The main issues are the size of the pieces of wood on offer and the orientation of the grain. Really, for making a guitar, you want the very best quarter sawn wood that you can lay your hands on, but if you're restricting yourself to reclaimed wood, then it's really a lottery as to what you're going to find. In the case of the dining table, I took the best piece I could. There was a little bit of quarter sawn, but then the grain ran out in other areas, so there was a lot of wastage, but this is what I managed to get out of it. In the case of a gypsy jazz guitar, for me it's a complete experiment to use mahogany, a hardwood, for the top. So typically you would expect to see softwoods used for the top and hardwoods for the back and sides. I didn't have any softwoods that were reclaimed at my disposal, so I decided to use the same wood for the top. I really love the sound of those nice woody, dry, all mahogany martins, and I thought, we'll see what we can get with a mahogany top on a gypsy jazz guitar. It's worth saying that mahogany is a term that's kind of used for a whole variety of different woods, many erroneously labelled as mahogany. Some are not true mahoganies and some are. And there's African mahogany, Honduras mahogany, Brazilian mahogany, and then a whole load of things. Sapele looks a lot like mahogany, is almost indistinguishable. So in the case of this guitar, I've called it mahogany, but it's probably something a little bit different. So the problem with using mahogany for the top is that generally a hardwood is too stiff, so it will produce a different kind of sound. It's a great sound, but it's not always what people are expecting to hear. Softwoods like spruce will give you a really crisp, balanced sound with a lot of detail and a lovely big harmonic range, so you get the depth out of those bottom strings, but you get this lovely sweet tone out of the high strings. In the case of mahogany, it's going to kind of slightly narrow that bandwidth, which is great for these kind of guitars because they're all about having a mid-range punch straight down the middle of that harmonic spectrum. To compensate for the fact that it wasn't a softwood for the top though, I basically took the top very thin. It's just under 2mm, which is going to make a lot of luthiers at home squirm in their seats a little bit. However, I sort of decided to play it a lot with the bracing, so there's a lattice brace under the top. A little bit like the sort of double tops from classical builders like Greg Smallman. The idea is you're going to get a lot of snap with the sound, and the bracing is doing a lot of the heavy lifting for keeping the structure of the top. So think kind of banjos. They have a very, very thin top. You get a much brighter, punchier sound. And I think that's what we've got with this guitar. It doesn't end there with the experimental materials here. I've used oak quite a lot through this guitar, and oak from a beam in a house. Oak is not a typical acoustic guitar tone wood, that's for sure. So I've limited the use of the oak to mostly decorations. So the binding around the edges, the headstock veneer, the fingerboard. It's quite a good fingerboard material because oak is really hard and wears well. So actually it's great for a fingerboard. But the problem with oak is the colour. So a lot of the time, visually, I think light coloured fingerboards don't work too much for me. Maybe unless it's a Telecaster or something special. In this case, oak on the fingerboard I think works quite well because I wanted to create contrast with the Corian inlays. I've also French polished over the fingerboard. That's going to give some protection to the playing surface. And once that fingerboard wears a bit in the future, it can be quite easily spruced back up with a fresh session of French polishing. So the unseen materials on the inside that are really doing a lot for the sound of this guitar as well are some cedar floorboards that we use for the bracing. Another experiment. I'd never used cedar for bracing before, but I thought, hey, let's give it a go. So a lot of the bracing is lattice bracing, which for these guitars is very unusual, but I've combined the lattice with some ladder bracing, so it's quite a complex bracing pattern going on. But cedar is a softwood. It's light, it's got strength across the grain, so I think makes an ideal bracing material. We've also got Corian inlays in the fingerboard. So Corian is like an artificial stone, and in this case it's been pulled out from an old black kitchen worktop, and it's been chopped up, thicknessed, put into wafer thin pieces and inlaid in various areas of the fingerboard and the tailpiece, and there's even a Corian nut at the end, and that's kind of sticking quite nicely with the contrasting themes. Even the fillet on the rosette is repurposed from an old piece of jewellery. The features. So what else have we got going on this guitar? We've got a side sound port. I'm a big fan of the side sound ports. If you saw my last video, you'll know this is like an acoustic monitor. Gives you a little bit of the sound of your own guitar when you're playing in an acoustic environment. We've also got the tailpiece design, so this is kind of fundamental to the sound of the gypsy jazz guitars. Shallow grand tune machine heads. These are great, they're lovely tuners, look especially beautiful. In all other respects, it's based on my standard gypsy jazz guitar design. This is the long scale length, 670mm, 14 frets to the body. Probably the most popular style of gypsy jazz guitar, so you've got full access for those ripping solos. The sound. Well, I think the sound of this guitar is especially bright, and I think that's got a lot to do with the hardwood top and the lattice bracing, but it's still got a good punchy volume. So I think if you want to stand out a bit in a jam, this is quite a good guitar, and it's going to turn a few heads anyway. Overall, it's a pretty balanced sound, which makes it great for a rhythm guitar. It's got all the punch of a gypsy jazz guitar, so I wouldn't expect that bright sparkle that you get from your kind of Martin steel string acoustic. You've got the side sound port, so you get a nice true sense of how it sounds out front as well. guitar really excels is on the rhythm sound. Comfortable, easy to play. It just really projects around that kind of middle of the fingerboard. That's what it feels like to me. Tell me in the comments below if you think there's something I should be talking about. And if you've got any questions, I want to hear them. Speak to you soon. Bye.